Hey guys, alrighty, continuing on, memory chapter. This one you've learned about the multiple systems in long-term memory, and remember I told you, memory's plural. There's not one memory system, there's a number. We're going to talk about that in more detail here, and I'm also going to link it up to, well, your peer scholar activity and give you maybe a deeper sense of why I created Peer Scholar in the first place, and why I hope you keep running into Peer Scholar activities throughout your time here at University of Toronto. So let's jump in. All right, so we'll start at our usual starting place here, just to orient ourselves. When we said there were multiple memory systems, yes, at first I was talking about, we have sensory memory, we have working memory. Those two you probably didn't even think of as memory systems prior to this, but both are systems we use to keep information from the past around, and therefore they're memory systems, the past influencing the present. But now we're going to get to the one that you probably really thought of when you thought of memory, although you'll see there's more to it too, because although we have one little box here, long-term memory, just like we could unpack this box and have the fun logical loop and all that, we're now going to unpack this box. We're going to talk about the various forms of long-term memory. What do all of these forms have in common? Well, the reason they're all long-term memory is the notion behind these is we've done something at some point in time, and then time has passed, and sometimes a significant amount of time has passed, hours, days, weeks, months, years, even in some case. And then we can pull those memories out. I'm being it's hard to say because the different systems do this different ways. But the real idea is this is a place where we store information over a very long term. Okay, so sensory memory was seconds. Working memory was sort of how long you keep thinking about it. But long-term memory, you've now stopped thinking about it, but somehow you're able to store some information that you can bring back at a later time. And that's what makes it long-term memory. So again, dun, 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 boom. These are all the different forms of long-term memory. So basically along the bottom here, these are subtly different kinds of long-term memory. We're not going to talk in detail about them all, although we kind of have. So I want to just kind of give you this looks intimidating when you first see it. Boom, right? But let's break it up a little bit, and then let's realize what you already know, and then let's talk about the stuff we haven't talked about in detail. So the first distinction you see here is between what we sometimes call declarative or explicit memory and non-declarative or implicit memory. What do we mean by that? Well, remember, memory is any time the past is having an effect on us in the present. And in the declarative ones, these are cases where we are actively trying to retrieve information from the past. And so, this is stuff we are in command of, and we know that we're retrieving this information. So let's just, let's be explicit about it. This is what you mostly think of in terms of memory. In fact, this is probably what you mostly think of in terms of memory. So let's go here. This is episodic memory, your memory for past events. So quite often, I said earlier, imagine you'd gone to Jamaica and somebody said, hey, what did you do while you were in Jamaica? Well, now you're, casting your memory back to that trip, and you're reliving some events that you experienced. So that's what some of our memory is. And again, that's something we have a certain amount of control. Oh, my trip to Jamaica, let me go and retrieve that. And so I'm aware I'm retrieving it, and I'm able to tell you, that's why it's declarative. I'm able to tell you what it is I'm kind of experiencing here. And so I can tell you, about some events I did in Jamaica. Now we're going to differentiate that from another kind of declarative memory where you also try to query memory and you also can get a reply, but it's not event-like. Okay, and this would be your knowledge about things. What is the capital city of Canada? Who is the current president of the United States? That last one might bring to mind some events, but usually, the real static ones is what's 12 plus 8? So we do 12 plus 8, and we know it's 20. That's just a fact that we know, but we're not reliving a past event. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit of detail, but those are the two declarative things, right? We can query our memory to relive some past event, or we can query our memory to pull out some piece of information that we know. And we call those the declarative memory. Now, these non-declarative memory systems instead are ones we sometimes don't even think of as memory, and we often don't know. We're certainly not trying to retrieve per se. So, for example, skills and habits. If you just think of your operant conditioning now, right? You're getting to know this stuff quite well. If you do something in a situation and it leads to a positive consequence, that could become a habit. That could be something you always do in that situation. And therefore you go in that situation and you just do it. So the past is having an effect on you, therefore it's memory, but you don't feel like you're remembering anything, right? Also, imagine you're learning a musical instrument or a sport or something like that, and you know that as you practice more and more and more, you become more and more and more fluent in performing that. Again, you don't think of that as memory retrieval, but it's the past affecting your present performance, and the more you practice, the better this performance is, and so that is the past coming through in your current performance, and therefore we as psychologists consider that memory. But again, it's not declarative. It's not like you're trying to remember. Somebody could say, oh, can you tell me how you play this song? And then you might say, oh, how do I play that song? Now you're reliving the event. But if you just sit and play it, you're probably not reliving some event. You're just playing, right? And that's the difference between this and this. Okay, cool. Now, here's the ones we're not going to talk. We're going to talk about these three in a lot more detail. And that's what the chapter really focuses on. So semantic memory, episodic memory, procedural memory in terms of the chapter. And we'll use those terms here as well. These are the ones we're not going to talk about, but again, we already kind of have, okay? So non-associative learning, we talked about those creaks in the house that first get you all alert, but then you habituate to them, you get used to them over time, and so suddenly you just stop responding to it. So that's a form of learning. Every form of learning involves memory, right? Because it's some event changing the way you behave in the future, and therefore it's learning. Simple classical conditioning, so much more associative kind of conditioning here of emotional responses or skeletal musculature. This isn't all that critical, but classical conditioning again, when and I would say operant conditioning here to some extent as well. When you're in some situation and either through classical or operant conditioning, you learn a new behavior to a stimulus. Let's say that. That's a form of memory, but again, we don't really think of it as memory. We're not trying to memorize anything there. We're just having experiences that are shaping our behavior. But because they change our behavior, that's called memory. And finally, priming. Remember the Darren Brown, the guys that went and saw all those things on their way to the ad agency or way to talk to Darren anyway. And then he said, okay, give me an ad. And all of those things they had seen kind of came through in their ideas. We call that priming. That trip, they primed the zoo and they'd primed the bear and they'd primed whatever. And so these things were now a little more active in the person's brain, but not consciously. So this is the other touch here. Implicit memory. These are considered sort of unconscious uses of memory, whereas this is conscious. You're aware you're using memory over here. You're often not over here. Okay, so we've seen examples of these ones. We're not going to talk about those. We're going to focus on these ones. And in fact, I'm going to begin by talking about these two. And then I'm really going to talk about the distinction between semantic memory and skills and habits and how it's related to your experience here at the university. Okay, so let's begin with the facts versus events, also called semantic memory and episodic memory. I can produce an episodic memory in you quite easily. What did you have for lunch yesterday? To answer that question, you kind of, how do you do this, by the way? Be amazed at yourself every now and then. I think you should be. You somehow cast your mind back to yesterday. It's like you try to find some hook that can bring back to mind something about around lunchtime yesterday. And can I do it? Yes, I can do it now. It can be tricky. Okay, I got it. Yeah. Okay. So now what I can do is I can see having lunch yesterday. I remember I created, I built my own lunch, which was a sandwich. And so I know toasting the buns, cutting the tomatoes, cutting the avocado. And I can see myself building all that. I can see myself and my wife and my dog sitting down as we ate all that. So this is what an episodic memory is about. It's reliving a previous episode. And it comes with this sort of rich. Now we're back to the imagery issue, right? We're back to that thing of, well, you're not really reliving it. It's not like you're there. It's like a pale version of actually being there, but you do have some of these details: who you were with, where you were, what you were doing, things like that come back to mind. And so it's like a package of information that all comes together that feels sort of like we're reliving the past. That's very different from if I ask you what you know about something. So this is what you know about apples. You know they're edible, you know they're a fruit, you know they have a stem and seeds, they grow on a tree, they can be red and round, they can also be green, they can be sweet, they can be not so sweet. So we got all this information about stuff, knowledge that we've acquired through our lives. And we call that semantic memory. And the difference is when we're retrieving this knowledge, we don't tend to create a whole context. We don't relive the episode where we learned it. We just know the knowledge. The knowledge just comes to mind. So that's the real difference between these two, right? In either case, it's looking for an answer. So here you were asked, what did you have for lunch? So I'm asking you for an answer. I am asking you for information. But when you retrieve that information, you get the whole rich context with it. In this case, if I ask you for information like, do apples have seeds? You can say, well, yeah, they do. But you don't retrieve some whole past experience. You just get the information. Okay. And so one of the things I don't think is discussed in the textbook that well is how these two systems relate to one another. And I think this is an interesting thing to understand. And really what it just is this issue of apples having seeds. You probably came to that knowledge, experienced that knowledge across a wide range of contexts. So maybe the very first time that somebody cut open an apple and showed you there were seeds, that might have been like, oh, wow, there's seeds in the apple. And if I had said on the following day, what was in the apple yesterday? Well, you might say, oh, there were seeds in the apple. But now, the next day, you probably would remember, oh, yeah, I remember we cut it up and there were seeds in it. So originally, you'd have an episodic memory. But now, let's say a little further in your life, somebody cuts open an apple and there's seeds in it. So you notice it again in a different place at a different time. And then at another place and another time, you come into contact with that information again. And so eventually, we have interacted with the fact that apples have seeds in so many different contexts, at so many different times, with so many different people, that all of that context disappears. Okay, suddenly the memory we have of apples and seeds is not bound to some very specific event where we learned that. We learned it across so many events that the context disappears, and now we just have the knowledge. So repeated exposure to some piece of information, what's 7 times 6? You've run into that so many times in so many different situations that eventually you just know 42, and you no longer relive the experience of learning that. So that little bit of information about apples that was episodic, originally becomes semantic. So that's how these systems interact. We go through life, we have these experiences, we come into contact with knowledge. Sometimes we can re-experience that whole thing, and that's an episodic memory. Sometimes it's just that knowledge we've acquired across a bunch of experiences is just knowledge we know, and that's semantic memory. Okay, in a way, universities are trying, one of the things we're trying to do is build up your semantic memory, build up your knowledge, what you know, the facts, the information, the knowledge you have. And we do that by giving you experiences with that knowledge, having you interact with that knowledge. And if you interact with that knowledge, you might have said sometimes like, wow, I've taken 2 courses and a lot of them are the same. A lot of the first part of this course was very similar to the other course. Why would they do that? Why? Well, one of the reasons we do that is we want you to come into contact with that knowledge in a number of different contexts. And as you do, it becomes stuff you just know. Okay, so this is the sort of traditional view of universities, to be honest, was the idea of trying to give you a bunch of knowledge. We were trying to have you leave the university with a whole lot more information and knowledge than you had when you came in. And a lot of the traditional approaches to education you see, this is their basis. This is the kind of thought process. Now, I am one to claim this is not enough for you guys. That yes, we need to do this. Yes, this is important. But we have to keep in mind something else. And so that'll bring us to here, getting to the distinction between skills and knowledge. So I like to just say it this way. You can learn a great deal about guitar playing in a 1-hour lecture. If somebody gave you a lecture, they could tell you all sorts of information about different kinds of guitars, about why maybe people play a certain guitar in a certain situation and another guitar in another situation. They could tell you about things like keys, minor keys and major keys, and you could get a sense of how they're different. You could learn a whole lot of information in an hour. But if you wanted to play the guitar, you're not going to learn it by just sitting and listening to somebody. If you want to play the guitar, you want to learn that skill versus the information, well, it's a different path. It's a different path to learning. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. So here we're really talking about the difference between semantic information, knowing a lot about guitar playing, and procedural memory is how the textbook talks about it. Actually learning the skills of playing a guitar. Okay, now if you want to learn those skills, that procedural memory, it's a very different thing. And skills are important. And they're important to you. In fact, hey, how come this doesn't have my skill? There it is, skills of success. Excellent. There's a lot of discussion now about the job market you will face when you graduate. And the fact that it's very dynamic. It's constantly changing. That jobs we used to have are disappearing. And brand new jobs that never existed before are emerging. We're at such a dynamic time in sort of the creation of technology and all sorts of things that the job market is constantly changing. And we know that most students actually are in 5 or 6 different job contexts before they settle into a career. And they can be quite different job contexts. So what this says is we can't just train somebody to have the information they need to do a certain job. You know, that can't be what we do at university. If we just train you to be the best lab tech, biology lab tech you could be, and you know all the information you need to do that well, that's great if there's biology lab tech jobs waiting. But what if there isn't and you end up having to do something else? That's where these skills of success come in. The idea here is if we also teach you these things, then these are the skills that can help you succeed in almost everything you do, okay? And so critical and innovative thinking these are things that allow you to be creative, entrepreneurship, resourcefulness, application of skills, reflective thinking, reasoned decision making. We want you to be able to do these things. These are the problem solving sorts of skills. So if you work in some company, let's say Durham Flight School, hey, we want more engaging lectures, or e-learning Ontario. We want to figure out the right way to do e-learning. Well, that requires these sort of deep thinking skills. I tend to boil these down to these two, critical thought and creative thought. I think it captures a lot of this stuff that's in here. But you also need to be able to interact with other people. Hence the group work that you're experiencing now. So your communication skills, your organizational skills, what's to say, teamwork and collaboration, sociability and collegiability, empathy and compassion. These sorts of skills allow you to work effectively with other people. And we know that that's core to success in the current job market. Intrapersonal skills. This is the ability to kind of know your own strengths and weaknesses and to know how to grow. Involves things like self-discipline, ability to learn independently, flexibility and adaptability, self-awareness, perseverance, and self-motivation, compassion, integrity, and self-respect. So you have to learn these skills of the self, of self-management, of self-knowledge as well. If you can learn these skills, I'm not going to talk so much about these ones in the bottom, although I think you'll see we hit on those too. And what I'm saying, I'll focus on these 3. I kind of put the bulk into this list. This is my list of 6. that I think are the core critical skills. Critical thought, creative thought, receptive communication. That means being able to shut up and listen to somebody else. And expressive communication is the opposite, being able to express your own ideas well. Communication requires both of those. You have to learn to listen and you have to learn to speak. Collaboration also brings in things like empathy and compassion, sociability. So you guys doing group work in Peer Scholar right now, some of you saying, oh, I don't know if I like this group mate, or we're not getting along, or whatever. And I'm saying, work it out, figure it out, man. Because that's what you're learning, is these skills of collaboration by trying to figure out how your team can work together effectively. And metacognitive awareness is all of this intrapersonal stuff. Knowing yourself, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and understanding how to get better. Okay. So in my position as an instructor, there's a skill, procedural memory skill, like learning to play guitar. And you use procedural memory to do that. But these are also skills. And these skills, I believe, we should be developing as you're in university. The problem is, the trick is, the challenge is, how do you develop them? Because developing skills is different than knowledge. You cannot just develop skills through passive exposure. We can't just expose you to something. I mean, we can go all Bandura on you, and we can show you people as they use these skills. And therefore, by sort of social imitation and such, you can get a sense of how people who are effective at using those skills use it. But that can only take you so far. You can only learn so much about playing guitar by watching somebody play guitar. Eventually, you have to play. You have to do the skill. And this is tricky, by the way, because if it's a skill you're not very good at, you start by sucking. Okay, you start by not doing very well. But then, with repeated practice, preferably within a structured environment where you're getting a lot of feedback, if you get to practice using that skill over and over and over again, preferably across different contexts too, then it becomes something you can do. So even the most unnatural skills, there's nothing natural about playing guitar, right? It's the weirdest thing ever. But if you look at somebody who spent a lot of time practicing, for them, it is natural. It becomes what we call second nature. It becomes a habit to just put a guitar in their hand, and they have the right habits to make it sound good. I want you guys, I want critical thinking and creative thinking to be a habit. I want good communication skills to be a habit. I want good collaboration to be a habit. And so my challenge years ago was to try to think, how can we give you this kind of experience? Repeated practice using critical thought, creative thought, communication skills, learning about yourself as you do. And what did I create? This puppy I co-created. So Peer Scholar, the experience you guys went through once and you're going through now again. The whole idea of Peer Scholars, you have people submit something, but then when they go into the assess phase, as you're trying to give each student some advice about how their work can be better, you first have to read what they're saying, receptive communication. You have to think about it critically, critical thought. You got to think about it creatively. What could they do differently that would be better? Then you have to express that back to the person, expressive communication. And as you do this, you are seeing a bunch of examples of work you yourself did. So you're getting a sense of where your work fits, a very clear sense. And you're also seeing examples of people who are doing better than you. These can help you really have a good metacognitive awareness of where your strengths are. Okay. So, and the reason we're having you do this to multiple peers is that's the repetition, right? You think critically and creatively and you communicate to the first peer. And then you go to the second peer and you do it again. And you go to the third peer and you do it again. A very structured practice using those skills. And that's just the assess phase. Then you come back to the reflect phase. Now it's all about your work. So it's all metacognition now, learning about your own work. But again, you have somebody now, piece of feedback by piece of feedback. Each peer is telling you how you can be better. And I'm asking you to respond to that feedback. And so you have to be receptive communication, think about it critically, think creatively about changing your work the way that's suggested, and then decide, maybe to change your work so that's your expressive communication there. It's a different context now. It's about receiving feedback rather than getting. And learning to learn from feedback is the key to self-growth. It is the key to being a coachable kind of player that when managers see, they go, oh yeah, there's somebody who can learn and grow. And so that whole phase is about that. So all this to say, I know Peer Scholar is a little stressful. When the grades come out, by the way, you may found that some grades are not as high as you hoped they would be. A lot of times students are surprised that that the Peer Scholar activity is challenging, that the skills we're asking you to use, you're still developing them. You're not at that really strong level yet. But that's the idea of Peer Scholar. Keep throwing you in, keep giving you that experience, and keep giving you that practice. And so it's not so much about learning facts and knowledge. It's about developing these skills that will help you be innovative and successful. And, just to give you one taste, my favorite taste of that, imagine a skill like critical thinking. We often talk about the workplace. You'll be in some future workplace, and that skill will help you, help them solve problems and therefore you to be a success, etc. True, absolutely. But these are not just about workplace. This is about personal development. Good critical thinking will help you choose the right life partner. If you want a life partner at all, maybe some of you don't want a life partner, but if you do want a life partner, critical thinking can help you choose the right one. Creative thinking can help you keep that person interested in you. Communication skills will probably be the key of your success as a couple. And so all of these skills are not just career skills. These are life skills. These are skills that if you develop them, you will be more successful and you will be happier. And my opinion is that these skills are almost as important, if not more important, than the knowledge you're learning. And that's my hope for, why I hope that you will come into interactions with Peer Scholar all the way through your career in different contexts, physics, chemistry, whatever, because you're going to continually get that practice. And with sufficient practice, these unnatural skills can become second nature. Cool. Taking the chapter, connecting it with a lot of stuff you're doing. I hope that was useful. I will see you in the next one. Bye.